First thing you'll need is a soldering iron. You can take pretty much any soldering iron, but just get a cheap one. The 25 watt soldering iron will do the job. Some people say 25 watts isn't enough to solder on the back of pots, but we'll prove them wrong a little bit later. And yeah, don't go out and spend a lot of money to begin with. You really don't need a temperature-controlled soldering station unless you're getting quite serious and you're doing really delicate work and you really need to have consistent temperatures to your soldering tip. Here's some solder, and get some 60-40 rosin core solder. It's really important to get this type of solder. It will make life easier for you, and you don't have to use other chemicals which are called flux, and quite honestly it's just not needed for guitar circuits or general hobbyists and that sort of thing. Buy it in this type of roll. Don't buy it in these small little rolls, because they honestly you're just wasting your money, because they're quite expensive for this size and they'll run out really quick. You'll be surprised how quickly you'll run out of solder. Tend to go for these type of little reels of solder, and you'll be fine. You'll have enough to go for a little while. Now I was talking about these they're called 60-40 rosin cord, and what that means is basically they've got a chemical called flux inside the center of the solder. And that's an additive that will clean the surface that you're trying to solder to, so it cleans the metals. However, flux is corrosive, so you can get it separately in these little jars, but if you're going to do it this way, you don't really need to, but it does help get a nice tight bond with your soldering. And if you're doing bigger items like jacks and things like that, or input jacks, guitar leads, you could possibly have a need for this stuff, but this stuff's already in the 60-40 rosin core, so I wouldn't bother with it unless you get really serious, and then you'll understand what it's for. Next up, you'll need a sponge, or well, it's pretty much just a sponge. This is to clean your soldering tip. It's really important to keep your soldering iron's tip as clean as possible and contamination free. I can't stress enough how important it is. A lot of people say there's a bit of a problem with using a wet sponge, because then the temperature changes between your soldering iron tip. I wouldn't worry about that for guitar repair and guitar electronics. It's not a big deal for what we're doing. Another alternative is to use these type of brass type of steel wool, and you can buy them from electronic stores. I think they're available in copper as well, and basically you just dip your tip in that, and then it will clean it up without actually changing the temperature of your soldering iron. Next thing we'll talk about here is soldering iron braid. Now we need to desolder. You might think it's not important, but it is. It's really, really important. There's nothing worse than trying to solder old solder and create a joint as well. You should try to use new solder, and this is a really good tool for removing old solder. You can get another thing called a desolder pump, but they take a lot of skill, a lot of practice to use, and they're really only for delicate work. A must is a soldering iron holder. Don't put it on an old sock, don't put it on the edge of your bench or anything like that. Get a nice and secure place where you can pick it up and put it down and not worry about it burning anything, and have a nice secure place. You never know, it could drop on your leg. It's a good idea to get some, these are called helping hands. So these items here really, really helpful. They'll hold all your components, hold wire in place, hold pots, anything you've got. You may think to yourself, I don't need that, I'll just throw my pliers over it and hold it with that, or put a bit of weight over what I need to hold. But this thing is indispensable. Mine's a bit trashed, as you can see. I've repaired it a few times, but they're like $5. So let's get on to actual tools that'll help you. I like to use a set of bent nose, long nose pliers. On the far left there, they're really good. They're the mini version, like $3. In the middle, I've got a nice set of flush cutters. These are from an electronics store. They're not that cheap, around 15 to $20 for this cheap pair, but they're really, really good, really sharp, and they'll give you a nice flush finish whatever you're cutting. They cut wire really easy. That big funny looking thing in the middle, the red thing, that is a wire stripper, the best wire stripper I've ever used. It looks a little strange, but it will give you consistent lengths of wire stripped every single time you put it in there. It's quite adjustable. It's got a lot of crimping options on there, wire cutters and so forth, but I just use a stripping mechanism, and it was only like $29 or something like that. Really good investment. And then the last thing on the right hand side, I just use a screwdriver. A screwdriver will help you hold things like wire in place or a capacitor lead in place if it's moving around, just so that you can apply your solder and soldering iron to the joint and keep it in place, because the last thing you want to do is for the joint to be disrupted. You don't want the joint to move whatsoever when you're soldering. You want it to cool naturally. Don't blow on your joints or anything like that. Let it cool naturally and bond to each other.
Alright guys, so here's the quick video on how to solder a pot. Here we have a Gibson style potentiometer, and regardless of what pot you have, they're all pretty much the same. You'll have your 3 lugs on there, if you can see that. Hopefully this camera is 1, 2, 3. Hopefully this camera's focusing properly. So all I've got here is a set of those helping hands, and they really do help. They come in really handy. So I'm just going to plop that on top of that like that. And so what's happening, so this pot is used. This is the one I'm replacing from the Gibson Les Paul that I'm currently working on. And just for demonstration purposes, this here has, right here, this terminal is all clogged up with solder, so we want to remove that. And the best way to get rid of it cleanly, you can use a solder sucker, which I've got somewhere but I can't find it. It's a skill. I mean, it's something you really have to practice doing and know how to do it. You do have to have a decent soldering iron to get the joints really hot, but you can also use the solder braid. Solder braid's really cool, really easy to use, and doesn't take long at all. So my soldering iron's nice and hot. A nice shiny tip, and there's nothing wrong with applying solder to your tip as long as you clean it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to heat up the joint, just like that. And I'm going to put the braid on top of the joint, and then the soldering iron on top of the braid. Now watch out for your hands, because it's going to get really hot. You will use up a lot of braid when doing this method, because it is sucking up all the solder. However, if we look at our final result now and how quick that was, I can just tilt this towards the camera. I'm not sure if you can see there, but there's now a nice clean hole in that middle terminal, or middle lug, some people call it. So it's a really, really cool and easy way to do it. And it doesn't take long at all. It's really good stuff. So make sure you have some of this soldering braid when you're soldering, because it really is a big help. Okay, next on my list here. Now we spoke about tools, but let's just show you here. So these wire cutters here, these are some of the best wire strippers I've ever had in my life. And I'll just zoom out a bit with the camera. Now, why are they so good? They've got a lot of settings in here. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see that, but here's a depth stop for how much I want to trim off. It's as simple as putting the wire into the teeth, going like that, and you have an instantly perfect stripped wire every time. So I really highly recommend that you invest in a proper set of wire strippers, especially if you're getting into making things like effects pedals and that. Don't use a blade, it's terrible. You'll just cut off pieces of your stranded wire and so forth. Don't use side cutters. By side cutters I mean something like these flush cutters here. Don't use these. You'll do the same. Just get yourself the proper tools, and it will take the frustration right out of making effects for you. It really will. So using our helping hands here, one thing that's really important that a lot of people don't really mention is that when you have a piece of wire, I'm trying to get this out of the shadow, there you go. When you have a piece of wire, it's really important to tin the wire. So by tin I mean just put a little bit of solder over it. So what we're going to do is going to heat the wire, get it hot, and apply a bit of solder, just a tiny bit. Move your soldering iron up and down it a bit, and that's it. So what you've essentially done is you've put a small coat of solder right around the wire. That's now turned into, you could say, more of a solid core wire now, rather than a stranded wire. Just zoom in a little bit there. And yeah, it's really going to help the wire attach to whatever you're attaching it to, because it already has some solder on there. So what will we do with this piece of wire? Well, say you want to join this pot here to something or other. Lucky with this pot, it's got these through-hole connectors. So I'll pop this back in our helping hands and just make sure this is in focus. Best thing to do is, I always believe in a more of a mechanical connection. So what I'm going to do is going to take this piece of wire and just bend it up, just like that. Then we're going to sort of hook and thread it through that terminal, just so it's flat like that there. And it's quite easy to solder a wire to a pot. Just clean my soldering iron tip. Same principles apply. Heat up the join and the wire. I'm just going to go from underneath, and then apply your solder to the join and wire once it's hot. And you'll see it'll just start flowing through. And I'll just let go of that. It is quite a skill to control the amount of solder. You'll see it's not incredibly shiny, but that's a good healthy solder joint. It wasn't disturbed or anything like that, and it works really well. So next things up, we're going to just solder a capacitor, which is another common thing you'd solder to a guitar pot. So just change the orientation of these helping hands. Same thing will apply with the capacitor. Try to bend it up a little bit so you've got a more of a mechanical connection, and then thread it through. Okay, so the last thing we'll discuss here is how to solder a piece of wire to the back of a pot or the side of the pot. I actually prefer to solder to the sides of the pots because it just makes it look neater inside the guitar, but whatever you like. Best thing to do is to grab your soldering iron first and to start heating up the joint, just like that. You will have to apply solder to your soldering iron, and just keep it on there just like that. Try to get as much of the surface area of your soldering iron tip on there as possible, until the solder starts to flow, just like that. So once this has happened, grab remember your tinned wire, and I'm going to use these teeth to help me hold it into place. All I'm going to do now is hold it down with this screwdriver, and I hope I'm not blocking the camera. Apply heat and let go. Do not disturb the join, and take our screwdriver off. Done. That is a nice clean solder joint straight to the back of a pot, or side of the pot in this stage, and yeah, it's done.